It's a MotoGP podcast. It's myself and Dirk Jordan, and we're going to talk about the Austrian Grand Prix. But firstly, welcome back, Dirk.
Hello, India.
We are picking up a bit of momentum, which is a good thing. We saw our audience is mostly outside of South Africa, which is surprising, but also very welcome. What did you think when I sent you that picture?
Amazing. I couldn't believe it. Most of them are from the States, actually,
Yeah,
which just goes to show numbers count, hey? Most
yeah,
of the MotoGP fans are in Europe and the States.
yeah, here we are. All right, so this week we're going to be talking about Pecco Bagnaia's fight back. Secondly, we're going to be talking about how Brad Binder and KTM did at their home Grand Prix. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some of the juvenile errors that Marc Marquez made that cost him a podium probably. And all the timestamps are on the screen here. If you want to jump ahead to any of these parts of the discussion, you're welcome to. So, Dirk, let's start with Pecco Bagnaia. We saw last week at Silverstone, he fell behind Jorge Martin on the points table, but he fought back this week and he's retaken the lead in the championship. Tell us about that race and what happened.
He had an amazing weekend. This is his fault. This is his. He actually can almost view this as his home turf. The Red Bull Ring has just done so well over the years over there, and once again he did that. So Pecco is still king of the ring. He didn't get the pole position. Jorge Martin got that pole position in spite of hurting his left hand. Apparently, it was a shower incident, they said, in his motorhome, but he. So he had an injured thumb. However, he said during the race it didn't really bug him. But he got the pole position, and in the sprint got away. Pecco got away really quickly, got the whole shot, but then Martin took over. Led. Well, they had a bit of a duel during the first lap, and then Martin crossed the line first at the end of that lap, but after that Pecco just whizzed past, and that was it. The same thing happened in the main race. There Pecco Martin got the whole shot. Pecco went past eventually, and exactly the same thing. Once he was gone, he was literally just gone. Nobody could catch him. So he's king of the ring. Martin, at some stage of the race, decided, okay, let's just take the points, settle for second. There's no way that I am going to catch him. There were no excuses. It was just purely Pecco was just too quick on that GP24. And just by the way, we once again saw that the GP24s are just in another league now. They dominated completely the first three spots. There was a 3-second margin between him and Martin, and then another 7 seconds to Enea Bastianini in the third spot. So that's a 10-second gap between third and first on the podium. That is huge under any circumstances, So it just goes to show what Pecco did. So Bagnaia, he at this specific track, he's now won all 5 the last races that have been run there, both sprints, 3 Grand Prix. And during those races, he's only not led the first 2 laps of the sprint and the Grand Prix that we just saw. All the other laps he just led. And he led by quite a margin as well. And in the main Grand Prix on Sunday, he had put up the fastest lap time in 17 of the 28 laps as well. So there was just no way that anybody else was going to catch him. And he increased his lead to another 5 points. Interestingly enough, we also saw after the sprint on Saturday that they were literally head-to-head, 250 points each, which is also phenomenal. Just to think at this stage of any season to have the 2 front runners literally running neck and neck with exactly the same amount of points at the top of the leaderboard. That's just phenomenal. So we are very lucky to be witnesses to that.
Interesting thing for me is Bastianini ending 10 seconds behind Pecco Bagnaia on the same motorcycle. But that's partly because he only started in 7th place. But it's not as bad to start in 7th place in MotoGP than it is, for example, in a normal Formula 1 race or something like that.
Yeah. Yes.
What do you think made that much of a difference? Why is there such a big gap between him and Bastianini, for example?
Well, I think we have talked about this before, that they get the best equipment that money can buy, and Ducati's just got the best bike currently. However, things have been developed the last 2 years to suit Pecco. You will always the development will largely go in the direction of your number one rider, especially if he's the champion. So there is that. But I think we saw at this race specifically that Inea decided at a certain stage to just stick with it, just to drop back. You know, he never got the lap times that Pecco did, nor Martin. He just wasn't up there with them. So I think he decided, usually we see him picking up at the end of the race. But if we look at the lap times, we can see that about 5 laps from the end, he just stuck with that specific lap time. He didn't increase. So either he had a little bit of a tire problem, which is unfamiliar territory to him, or he just decided, okay, I'm not going to catch them. I'm going to stay here, and I'm just going to take the 16 points and make the best of the whole situation.
Martin led the sprint initially, but then again, he made another error in a corner, like we've been talking about repeatedly now. Once he's under pressure, he seems to be a bit vulnerable, fragile almost.
Yeah.
Repeated again this weekend.
There was heavy dueling during the sprint race. So they passed each other continuously, and then he went into the corner too fast and ran wide. So it does happen. It doesn't happen to all of them, but I think Martin, under real pressure, if he's not in front, that could be a weak spot, in his a chink in his armor. And what happened then on Saturday was that he ran wide. He took the detour next to the track, which is a shortcut, and he came back into second place. So he had to drop back and take a long lap penalty, which then gave that second spot to Marc Marquez. But he didn't end in second, as we will discuss later. So he was penalized for that. But yes, once again, that was a slip up. But he made no excuses for anything. He just said he was outpaced by Pecco and Pecco's bike on the day.
Well, it's getting exciting, and it's remaining exciting. This is very close. The dueling is
it's just another 5 points. It's just another 5 points in the game.
No, I like it. And then we talked about last week about the fact that KTM needs to do something, and they needed a home race victory, which is the Austrian Grand Prix in Austria, the Red Bull Ring. They needed to do better here. Brad did much better than he's done before. He seems to be, finding his groove again a little bit, Brad Binder, but still not good enough. Tell us about his weekend.
Yep. Yeah, well, we must also remember that this is Brad's favorite track. I mean, he scored a victory over here in 2021. And a second place subsequently, etc. So he really loves this track. I think the fact that it is KTM's home track is fortuitous, but it maybe adds to the way that he tackles the race. But he had a really good weekend. It's actually his best weekend since the second race of the season. He on Friday in the 2 practice sessions, he scored the 5th best time in both of them. Then on Saturday it started falling apart, unfortunately, and he went through, because of that 5th place, 5th best time, he went through to the Q2 automatically, but then he came last. He came 12th in Q2, so he had to start in the 12th grid position, which is very unfortunate. You ideally want him in about 4 or 5, round about there, between 3 and 6. On second row, let's say on the second row of the grid. That really suits his attitude and his riding style, because he uses the start to great effect as well these days. So he had to start in 12th, but he had 2 great races though. He came through and fought literally for a podium, especially in the Grand Prix itself. He had a really good start and landed up in 6th from 12th, which then made things easier for him. And then he ran in 4th for quite a long time, until Marc Marquez came from behind and took the 4th place off him. And so he ended up in 5th. But 5th is, he came 2nd in the season opener in Qatar and was 5th in Portugal in race 2 of the season. So it's equal to that. So that's really good. And we're glad for him and for the team, because once again, it was the best KTM on track. They also had Paul Espargaro, KTM, as wildcard rider, doing testing with one of the current spec bikes with even more radical aero, which we don't know. We'll see that later on all of the bikes. It's specifically another new tail end, and it's got side skirtings on the actual swing arm, which close the gap next to the wheel between that and the bodywork. I don't know what the actual effect of that was. Obviously, they're playing the cards close to the chest, but they did a lot of testing as well. And Paul had a reasonable showing, but during the race, he just fell to the rear because he's not on it these days. He doesn't have the practice all the time at that level. So all in all, it was a really good week, especially in the KTM stable, especially for Binder. Unfortunately, his stablemate Pedro Acosta had a horrible weekend on the gas KTM. It started on Friday when he rode. He touched the concrete barrier even to such an extent at a corner to such an extent that he lost some of the bodywork, and then he fell 3 times during practice. Including a very, very high-speed crash. What happened, apparently, he said that he came off and he still, at that session, had about 3 seconds left when he got back onto the bike. So he thought that he might just finish that lap and then put in one flyer again, because you have to remember that those qualifying sessions count whether you go through to Q2 automatically or whether you have to fight at Q1 for a spot in Q2 and then on the grid. So he wanted to put in another flyer, and he went out and the tire was cool. It had cooled down because of the accident, and it didn't have enough heat in the carcass of the tire. So when he pushed it too hard, it just gave. The front just gave away. So he had a really high-speed crash, 250 kilometers plus, stood up and walked away from it. But that settled it for him, He couldn't go through to Q2, etc., etc. So he had to start in the 14th position. And he salvaged it from there. I mean, he did okay. He ended in 10th and 13th. But he admitted, he said it could have been a rookie mistake. He said, well, maybe the same thing had happened to Marc Marquez or someone like that. They wouldn't have pushed as hard on that tire just after falling. So it's stuff that you have to learn. And I think the season, he's deep into his learning curve right now. He had a great beginning of the season, but right now it's just learning all the way. So he'll be back.
Talking about tires just briefly, I saw towards the end of the race how Brad was sort of, sliding sideways into the corners and that. The KTM seems to be eating its tires a bit more than the other bikes do. And the front tire chattering was a problem. I'm not sure if it's still a problem, but the KTM seems to be a bit on the edge as far as the tires are concerned.
Yeah, well, Brad rides it right up to the edge. We have to remember that. They do not have the same grip, especially as the GP24 Ducatis. Definitely not. But that's Brad's riding style. As soon as the tire starts giving way, he feels where that right racing edge is, and he rides it on the edge. So he doesn't mind sliding. So it's not a scare for him at all. But they don't have the same grip, especially at the rear of the GP24s. That's apparently where they are really scoring this year, is they just gelled so much. Their geometry and suspension just gelled so perfectly with the latest spec Michelin tire, that especially the rear. And that's where they get their huge grip, and that changes everything. That changes the way that they ride, that changes the way that they win.
Right, let's talk about Marc Marquez, my favorite rider. Even though I'm a South African, I like Brad Binder, but Marc Marquez is just in another level. He's been on the 23 spec bike this year for the first time on a Ducati. Battled a bit in the beginning, but he seems to be, finding his feet. But we were a bit concerned that he's not really taking that next step up. And this weekend, he qualified well, but then made some rookie errors that, in our opinion, might have cost him a potential podium. Tell us about that.
Yes, he made a double bogey. He had a double bogey this weekend. He had problems in both the sprint and in the main race. And in spite of having great speed at that track, he's never won at that track. So he could never do it on a Honda. So this was a really good showing on a year-old Ducati. We have to remember that. To qualify third on that track with really stiff competition amongst the other Ducati riders who love that track, and the Ducatis love that track. So he had a good practice sessions. He had a good qualified in third spot, and we started wondering, is he going to get another podium? Is it even possible for him to snatch victory? If something happens to Pecco, that sort of thing. But it was not to be. Firstly, he had a really good sprint race, and then he fell. He was running in second. Yes, he was running in second because at that stage, Jorge Martin had to take the long lap penalty. So that promoted Marc up into second spot, and he fell and handed the third spot, the second spot back to Martin on the podium as well. But that was unfortunate. It's not quite clear why at this stage, but do know that this is the 4th out of 5 sprints that he hasn't finished this year. So it's really not a good record. Well, if we take a look at his Honda record, same sort of thing happened. I mean, if last year he fell 23 times riding for Honda, just pushing it right to the limit. So that's where he rides. So if something does go wrong, that's it. He still did the best for the weekend of all the GP23 riders. Interestingly enough, and just as a side note, Pecco Bagnaia was asked, well, what about the difference between the GP23 and GP24 bikes? And he said, it's not such a big difference. He's ridden both of them, and he doesn't think there's such a big difference. Importantly, he says they do not do any further development on the GP24. They've got the bike and they just set it up and they ride it. Whilst the GP23 bike, Ducati is still developing that bike. They keep on going through changes and technical changes on that bike. So he sounded a little bit peeved off that they don't get the same attention as the GP23. However, that just goes to show that that bike, Ducati knows they have to do something about it because it's just not up to spec at this stage of the race. But then Marc Marquez again in the main race on Sunday had a really good one, except for he made a rookie error. Yes, whether that cost him a podium, we'll chat about a little bit. But he made a rookie error. Actually, he said that he went around. They did the sighting lap. He stood on the grid. Then what happened was, they noticed when they were waiting on the grid, they noticed that the valve of his tire was broken. So they took off the tire. They ran back. Now, you've got to remember, they have a limited amount of tires. So they can't just quickly swap to another one that's warm. So they had to run, and they go to Michelin, and they said, there's a problem with this tire. You have to give us a new one. They put on the new one because they've used all the others in qualifying, and his spec tire that he wanted to use, they've used that in qualifying in practices. So he gets a new tire. They put it on. The mechanics run back on the grid. They put on the new tire. Then he goes around. They do the warm-up lap. Now he knows he's got a cold tire. He didn't do the sighting lap on it, neither did they have it under the heating blankets for ages. So the core of that tire is cold. It's just room temperature. So he went around and he tried to put as much heat into that tire as he possibly could. Then he came up onto the grid and engaged the whole shot device. Now, the whole shot device works like this. There's a difference between the ride height device and a whole shot device. There aren't any ride height devices on the front of the bikes anymore. That's illegal. But you have the whole shot device. Now, whole shot is first guy through the first corner, that American term. So the whole shot device is something that they inherited from motocross bikes, and Ducati developed that. But these days, everybody's got them. It's a mechanical thing because you're not allowed to have any electronic assistance to suspension. So what happens is you come up to the grid, then you brake really hard, lift the rear basically like a stoppie, and all the pressure goes onto the forks. It compresses the forks, and you hold the button, and then there's a pin that locks the forks. So they are already compressed. So what happens now is your bike doesn't rear to the back. It stays flatter. You have more power delivery to the rear tire, etc. And the unfortunate thing, though, is as soon as you brake, that disengages because you don't disengage it with the same little lever. What happens is in the first corner, the whole shot corner after the start, as soon as the guys brake and it gets compressed again because of the forward momentum, it disengages. And then after that corner, the front suspension comes up to its natural height. So what he did on the grid was he came up, he engaged it by pressing it down, And then in an effort to get more heat in that front tire, he braked again to create friction, and that disengaged it. So if you look at the video material, you can see him on the grid looking down at the forks and trying to find out whether it has engaged or what is wrong. But that was too late. You can't just push it down and engage it. You need a lot of force. That's why they have to brake hard. And that was basically what happened. So he lost out on at the start. And then because of his momentum going into that first corner, he just was really pushing it. Frankie Morbidelli coming from the outside in, and they basically clashed and went halfway off the track, which cost them both a lot of positions. Mark fell back down to 13th from where he had to fight. However, he's been there. He's fought back from 14th and 15th in the past. So he did exactly that. He had the bit between the teeth, and he fought really hard, came through the whole pack, then ran behind Brad Binder for quite a while before he took fourth, and that's where he ended. So yes, it was an error. He shouldn't have made that mistake, but he says that his whole mind was just focused on that front tire because he knew if he couldn't get it warm enough, there would be trouble in that first corner and on the first lap especially until it's heated up. So it's heat, rubber, tire. It's that old problem that they do have. But he came back from that very successfully. Would he have gotten a podium? There's obviously the possibility. However, I went and I had a look at their lap times, the first four guys, their lap times during the race, the full complete race. And although he did really well, he just never was up to the same lap times that the GP24s were running. Enea Bastianini came third, and Marquez was an average of about 0.4 of a second slower than Enea Bastianini during the whole race. So it's doubtful whether he would have received that third spot, even if he was there right from the beginning. It's never impossible because things happen on the track, and if once they start dueling, things can change. However, just looking at the times, I don't think he would have received that bronze.
Just lastly, Frankie Morbidelli hasn't had, a wonderful season so far, but he seems to have found his feet again a little bit. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was surprising. I mean, he's really struggled. He's like in the last 12 to 15th, below 12th or 15th constantly this season. And he had a better weekend. He qualified 8th, and then he ran a 6th and an 8th in the two races. And interesting or ironically, it was also just after they had confirmed and announced that he would be going to VR46 next season, where he would run the GP24 spec bike at that team. His teammate Fabio Di Gianantonio would be running the GP25, and he'd be running the GP24. So just after that announcement, he does reasonably well for Pramac Ducati. So I hope we see him. I hope we see him back. He's such a good rider. If things fall in line for him during a race, he's right up there. Yeah.
Okay, next race is in Aragon in Spain, and then Italy, and then we're going to the Far East. What's waiting for us there?
That's it. Yes, completely different conditions. As we know, winter's approaching in Europe. So we're having the last two European races for now. The season ends at Valencia in Spain. But after these two, it's Aragon and then Misano, and then it's the Far Eastern circuit, Singapore, Australia, those tracks. Just a huge change in conditions, with moisture in the air and heat, etc. Looking forward to that.
Different time zones as well, which makes it more difficult.
Different time zones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to get up early.
Yeah, I know. At least the Formula One is on this side of the world at the moment. So yeah, that's a good thing. Thanks, Derek. That was interesting as ever. Appreciate it. We look forward to talking in next week.
See you then.